The rain in Oakhaven didn't wash away the sins of the night. It only turned the soil into a thick, suffocating sludge. Inside the Victorian-style manor at the end of Blackwood Lane, the silence was louder than any scream. When Detective Elias Thorne stepped over the threshold at 3:14 a.m., he expected a robbery gone wrong. What he found was a ritual of stillness. But the most chilling detail wasn't the body of Clara Vance lying perfectly positioned in the center of her velvet-lined parlor. It wasn't even the fact that every clock in the house had been stopped at exactly 12 o'clock. It was the muddy footprint leading into the house from the back. A print made 3 hours after the medical examiner's estimated time of death. The killer hadn't just fled. He had watched the life drain from Clara's eyes, walked into the woods, and then he came back. He came back for one specific, horrifying reason that would haunt the town of Oakhaven for decades. Oakhaven was the kind of town where secrets were buried under layers of polite etiquette and manicured lawns. Clara Vance was the crown jewel of this society. A former concert cellist turned philanthropist, she was 62 years old, wealthy, and lived alone after the mysterious disappearance of her husband, Arthur, a decade prior. Her home was a fortress of art and history. The night of November 14th was cold, the kind of cold that bites through wool and settles in the bone. Neighbors reported hearing a faint, melodic sound, something like a cello drifting from the manor around midnight, but no one called the police. Music was Clara's life, after all. Little did they know that melody was the soundtrack to a meticulously planned execution. The intruder hadn't forced his way in. There were no broken windows, no jimmied locks. He had a key, or perhaps he was invited. As the investigation unfolded, the crime scene revealed a disturbing narrative. Clara was found sitting in her favorite wingback chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes wide open, staring at a blank wall. There was no struggle, no defensive wounds. The cause of death was a single, precise injection of a paralytic agent followed by manual strangulation. But it was the return that baffled the FBI profilers. Security footage from a neighbor's driveway, barely catching the edge of the Vance estate, showed a shadowy figure emerging from the tree line at 2:45 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the lights in the parlor had flickered and died. The figure didn't head for the safe where Clara kept her heirloom diamonds. He didn't touch the silver. Instead, he walked straight to the body, stayed for exactly 7 minutes, and then vanished back into the mist. What happens in the mind of a predator who risks capture just to revisit his prey? Detective Thorne began to peel back the layers of Clara's life. On the surface, she was a saint. But in the basement of that grand manor, hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, Thorne found a collection of letters. They were dated back to the year Arthur Vance disappeared. They weren't love letters. They were blackmail notes. It appeared that the perfect Oakhaven couple had built their fortune on a foundation of industrial espionage and ruined lives. One name appeared repeatedly in these letters: Julian Vane. Julian was a former prodigy, a student of Clara's who had been expelled from the conservatory under a cloud of scandal involving a stolen composition. He had disappeared from the public eye 15 years ago, but his signature, a small, hand-drawn musical note, was found etched into the underside of the mahogany chair where Clara's body sat. The tension in the precinct was palpable as the forensics team analyzed the returned footprints. They found traces of a very specific type of clay, one only found in the marshlands 5 miles north of the estate. This led the SWAT team to a derelict boathouse. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs. Not of Clara, but of the detectives investigating the case. The killer wasn't just obsessed with the victim. He was obsessed with the aftermath. He had returned to the scene because he had forgotten something. Not a weapon. Not a piece of evidence, but a conductor's baton. He had left it in the garden during his first escape and felt the performance was incomplete without it being placed in Clara's cold, stiff hands. This realization sent chills down Thorne's spine. They weren't dealing with a common criminal. They were dealing with an artist who viewed murder as his magnum opus. The investigation took a darker turn when a second body was discovered. The town's mayor, found in his office, also paralyzed, also posed. And once again, the security feed showed the same shadowy figure returning to the office hours later to adjust the lighting. The killer was curating his crime scenes. He wanted the police to see the bodies exactly as he envisioned them under the morning sun. The one reason he returned was to ensure the aesthetics of death were perfect. He was a perfectionist who couldn't stand a hair out of place. As the body count rose, the town of Oakhaven descended into a state of paranoid hysteria. Curfews were enacted. The silence of the nights became terrifying. Every shadow was a potential killer. Every creak of a floorboard was a death sentence. Thorne realized that the killer was following a musical structure, a symphony of 5 movements. Clara was the first, the mayor was the second. There were 3 more performances left. The police tracked Julian Vane to an old theater on the outskirts of town. The final confrontation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Vane sat in the center of the stage, the house lights blindingly bright, waiting for Thorne. He didn't run, he smiled. He told Thorne that the most beautiful part of any piece of music is the silence that follows the final note. He admitted that he returned to the scenes because he wanted to hear that silence, to feel the weight of the void he had created. He wasn't looking for trophies. He was looking for the echo of his own power. To truly understand the depth of Julian Vane's depravity, we must look at the 3rd movement of his macabre symphony, an event that the media at the time dubbed the Midnight Gallery. 3 days after the mayor's murder, the town's prestigious art gallery was found unlocked. There was no alarm, no signs of forced entry. Inside, the night watchman was found staged in the center of the main hall, surrounded by priceless Renaissance paintings. But the paintings hadn't been stolen, they had been rearranged. Vane had returned to the gallery 4 times during the night, each time moving a single painting to better frame the composition of the watchman's body. This was the moment the FBI realized the one reason was evolving. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about control over the narrative of the discovery. He wanted to dictate exactly how the world would perceive his work. He was a director, and the police were merely his audience. The 4th movement was the most personal for Detective Thorne. His own partner, Sarah Miller, was targeted. She wasn't killed, but she was drugged and left in her own living room, posed as if she were sleeping. When she woke up, she found a note on her chest. It said, "I came back to see if you were breathing. You weren't. Then you were." The rhythm was off. The realization that the killer had been inside her home, watching her sleep, returning to check her pulse, sent her into a breakdown. Vane was playing with them now. He was testing their limits, seeing how much psychological pressure they could withstand before they snapped. The town's fear had moved from the physical to the existential. People weren't just afraid of dying. They were afraid of being used by Vane. As the search for Vane intensified, Thorne began to notice a pattern in the items Vane left behind. At Clara's, it was the baton. At the mayor's, it was a metronome. At the gallery, it was a sheet of blank staff paper. These weren't mistakes, they were clues. Vane was teaching Thorne how to read his music. The detective spent nights in the archives, poring over Vane's old conservatory records. He found that Vane's obsession with the perfect return began in his childhood. His mother, a failed opera singer, used to make him play the same piece over and over, forcing him to leave the room and walk back in to start again if even a single note was played with the wrong emotion. This repetitive trauma had manifested into a murderous compulsion. He couldn't just finish a task. He had to leave it and return to validate its perfection. The psychological profile was becoming clearer, but the danger was peaking. The 5th movement was approaching the grand finale. Vane had selected the town's cathedral for his closing act. On the night of the winter solstice, the bells began to toll at 3 a.m. Thorne knew this was it. He arrived to find the cathedral doors wide open. The air inside was thick with incense and the smell of ozone. Vane was there, but he wasn't alone. He had kidnapped the conservatory's current dean, the man who had expelled him all those years ago. The dean was strapped to a chair on the altar, a needle poised over his vein. Vane stood behind him, his hands moving as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra. He looked at Thorne and whispered, "I've already been back 3 times tonight. Each time I adjusted the angle of the candles. Now, the light is just right for the end." The confrontation was silent and deadly. Thorne didn't use his gun. He knew that's what Vane wanted, a violent, dramatic conclusion. Instead, Thorne began to hum the melody that Vane had failed to finish at the conservatory. It was a gamble. The humming broke Vane's concentration. The perfect rhythm was shattered. Vane screamed, dropping the needle, his face contorting in rage. He couldn't handle the dissonance. In that moment of weakness, the SWAT team moved in. But even as they tackled him, Vane was laughing. He gasped out, "You think you've stopped the music? I've already returned to the beginning." It was a cryptic warning that the police didn't understand until they searched his cell months later. The trial of Julian Vane was the most publicized in the state's history. He refused a lawyer, choosing instead to perform his own defense, which consisted mostly of cryptic metaphors about harmony and dissonance. He was sentenced to life without parole, but the story didn't end there. 2 years into his sentence, Vane was found dead in his cell. The cause? A paralytic agent, identical to the one he used on his victims. There were no signs of a struggle. The security cameras in the high-security wing had inexplicably flickered out for exactly 7 minutes, the same amount of time Vane had spent with Clara Vance's body. And on the wall of his cell, written in his own blood, was a single musical note. The mystery remains. Did Vane commit suicide to finish his symphony? Or did someone, perhaps a victim's relative or a secret accomplice, return to his cell to give him the finale he deserved? The case of the Oakhaven conductor remains a dark stain on the town's history. To this day, residents say that if you walk past the Vance Manor on a rainy night, you can still hear the faint, mournful sound of a cello playing a melody that never quite ends. It serves as a reminder that some killers don't just want to take a life, they want to own the memory of it. They want to be the directors of our nightmares, returning again and again to make sure we never forget their names. The empty chairs in the Vance parlors still face that blank wall, waiting for a viewer who will never come, or perhaps for a killer who never truly left. The legacy of Julian Vane is not just the lives he took, but the lingering feeling that even now, somewhere in the shadows, he is still checking the lighting, still adjusting the scene, still waiting for the perfect moment to return one last time. The Oakhaven conductor didn't just kill for revenge or greed. He killed for the sake of a twisted artistic vision. He returned to his crimes not out of guilt, but out of a pathological need for perfection. But the final question remains. Was Julian Vane truly the mastermind, or was he just a player in a much larger, much darker orchestra? Who provided him with the chemicals? And who delivered the final dose in his high-security cell? What do you think? Was there a grand conductor behind Julian Vane, or did he orchestrate his own end? Let us know your theories in the comments below. The most chilling theory will be pinned. If you crave more deep dives into the shadows of the human psyche, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Welcome to the Midnight Crime Vault. Sleep tight, if you can.